There is a question that history never quite answers about the people who changed the world. Were they made, or were they always going to be this way? When we look back at Genghis Khan, what most people see is the empire, the largest land empire ever assembled. Cities swallowed whole, civilizations bent into new shapes, a name so heavy with consequence that it still carries weight 8 centuries later. But empires do not explain themselves, and conquest, on its own, tells you almost nothing about the person who chose to pursue it. What actually interests me, what I think is the real story, begins much earlier and much quieter, before the armies, before the title, before the world had any reason to pay attention to him at all. It begins with a boy named Temujin on the Mongolian steppe in the year 1162, holding something strange and dark in his newborn fist. And what happened to that boy? Before anyone called him great, before anyone feared him, before anyone wrote down his name, is one of the most astonishing stories I know. Get comfortable, because we are going somewhere cold tonight. Our eyes open on the Mongolian steppe, sometime around the year 1162. If you have never seen the steppe, you must try to imagine it now. It stretches in every direction without mercy. A vast rolling ocean of grass that turns gold in summer and bone white in winter. The sky above it is enormous, bigger than any sky you've ever seen, and the wind moves through it constantly, carrying the smell of earth and horse and cold, carrying the sound of nothing human for miles and miles and miles. There are no walls here, no marketplaces, no roads that lead reliably anywhere. There are rivers that freeze solid without warning, and springs that vanish overnight, and storms that descend from the north with the speed and violence that no architecture can fully resist. The people who live here are shaped by it. They have to be. The ones who are not shaped by it simply do not survive long enough to pass anything on. Generation after generation, the steppe keeps only what it decides to keep. This is not a landscape that coddles you. This is a landscape that tests you every single day. It was into this world, not into a palace, not into a city, but into a simple felt tent called a ger, that a woman named Holan gave birth to a boy. The birth itself was unremarkable in almost every way, except for one detail that the people around her noticed immediately and that no one would ever forget. The child came into the world clutching something in his right fist, a blood clot, dark and dense, clenched tight as if he had already decided before taking his first breath that he would hold on to something and never let go. On the steppe, nothing was an accident. Everything in nature was a message from the eternal sky, the Mongols' highest god, Tengri. And so the shamans and elders who heard about this birth whispered the same interpretation to one another. This child was born to lead warriors. This child was born to conquer. His father, Yesugei, was a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan. He was not a great ruler. He was not wealthy. But he had the pride of a man who believed in his own bloodline with the kind of certainty that leaves no room for doubt. And when he looked down at that tiny fist, clenched around its clot of blood, he made a decision. He would name the boy Temujin, the name of a Tatar warrior he had just captured and defeated on the very day his son was born. It was a statement. It was a prophecy. It was the first and perhaps most important gift Yesugei ever gave his son. The idea that you could take the strength of your enemy and make it your own. But the world would not stay kind to Yesugei for long, and it would be almost completely unkind to Temujin. The steppe operated by its own brutal logic. There were no cities to hide in, no walls to shelter behind. Tribes moved with the seasons, following grass and water, Competing with other tribes for the same grass and the same water, alliances shifted, betrayals were common, and a man's power was only as permanent as his last victory. Yasuge understood this, which is why, when Temujin was around 9 years old, he did what any ambitious father on the steppe would do. He went looking for a bride, not for himself, for his son. Among the neighbouring Ungirat people, he found a family with a girl named Borte. She was perhaps 10 years old. She had a calm, steady face and eyes that, according to those who recorded the story much later, seemed to hold light in them like still water. Yasuge saw something in Borte's father, a man of dignity and good lineage, and the arrangement was made. Temujin would stay with Borte's family for a time, as was the custom, to grow close to the people he would one day join. And then, when the time was right, Borte would become his wife. Yasuge rode home satisfied. He rode home through Tatar territory, and that was where he made the last mistake of his life. He stopped to share a meal with a group of Tatar men who invited him to their fire. On the steppe, hospitality was sacred. You did not refuse a meal. To refuse was an insult. To accept was a bond, however temporary. But the Tatars had not forgotten what Yasuge had done to them. They had not forgotten the man he had captured, the man whose name now lived in his son. And into the food they offered him, into that sacred gesture of hospitality, they slipped poison. By the time Yasuge reached home, he was already dying. He had just enough time to send a servant to retrieve Temujin from Borte's family, and then he was gone. Temujin returned to find not a father, but a grave. Not a clan waiting to embrace their new young leader, but something far colder. A community calculating its own survival. Here is where we must stop and sit with what happened next. Because this is the part of the story that almost no one talks about when they talk about Genghis Khan. They talk about the conquests, the massacres, the empire, the ruthless military genius. They rarely talk about what a group of Mongol elders did to a 9-year-old boy and his family in the weeks after his father died. They abandoned them. The entire clan, the people that Yasuge had led, the people who had eaten his food and lived under his protection, decided that a widow with young children was a liability they could not afford. And so, one by one, then all at once, they pulled up their jers, packed their animals, and moved on. They left Holon. They left Temujin. They left his siblings, brothers Kasar, Hachiun, Temuge, and a young sister, Temulun. They left them in the middle of a landscape that killed people who were unprepared for it. What do you do with that? If you are Holon, you fight. History has not given Holon enough credit for what she did next. She ran after the departing clan, screaming at them, holding the clan standard aloft, the symbol of her husband's authority, demanding that they stop, that they honour what they owed. Some of the people wavered. A few families turned back, but most did not. And so Holon fed her children the way the steppe demanded, with her own hands, with roots dug from the frozen earth, with berries that barely kept them alive, with fish caught in rivers so cold that her hands cracked and bled. She taught her sons to use a bow to hunt mice and ground squirrels, because when you have nothing, you hunt what is available, and you feel no shame about it. She did not let them sit and mourn. Grief on the steppe was a luxury that killed people who indulged it too long. Holon understood this the way only a woman who'd already survived the impossible could understand it. She had been stolen from another man to become Yasuge's wife. She had built a life from that disruption. She was not going to let a second catastrophe finish what the first one had started. She told her children over and over, with the particular ferocity of a woman who had refused to accept the verdict of the world, We are alive. As long as we are alive, we can fight. But the cruelty of the steppe was not finished with Temujin yet. Within the family itself, a different kind of conflict was brewing. Yasuge had taken 2 wives, as was permitted, and his first wife had children of her own, older half-brothers to Temujin. Among them, a boy named Begta. Begta was older, he was stronger, and in a family surviving on the edge of starvation, he asserted the only kind of dominance available to him. He took food, he took the fish, he took the birds that Temujin and Qassar caught. He took them openly, without apology, as if it were his right as the eldest. On the steppe, perhaps it was. The logic of survival was simple and ugly. The strong ate first, and the weak watched. We cannot know exactly what passed through Temujin's mind during those days, but we can observe what he did. One afternoon, Temujin and his brother Qassar followed Begta to a hillside, where he sat alone watching the family's horses. They approached from 2 directions, and they raised their bows. When it was over, Begta was dead. Holan found out almost immediately, and her reaction, recorded in the secret history of the Mongols, the great oral history of Temujin's life, was one of horror. She raged at her sons. She called them destroyers. She compared them to wild animals that devour their own kind. She was not wrong to be horrified. But here is the thing that history keeps asking us to examine carefully. This act, this terrible, unambiguous act, was also the moment that Temujin stopped being a victim. He had watched his family be abandoned. He had watched his food be stolen. He had watched the world demonstrate over and over again that power was the only currency that mattered on the steppe. And he made a choice. A brutal, irreversible choice that drew a line in the dirt between the person he had been and the person he was becoming. He would not be taken from again. Not by anyone. Not ever. The world, however, had not yet received that message. Temujin was perhaps 11 or 12 when the Taichut clan came for him. The Taichut were old enemies of his father's family. They had been watching the abandoned widow and her children for some time, calculating the threat that Temujin might eventually pose if he were allowed to grow up and build alliances. A chieftain's son, even a destitute one, carried bloodlines that could rally people. It was safer, they decided, to remove him. They came to the family's camp with armed men. Temujin ran. He hid in the forest for days, eating nothing, moving only at night, while the Taichut searched for him. The secret history describes him crouching in the undergrowth, holding his breath, watching torches sweep through the trees. He lasted 9 days. 9 days alone in a landscape that kills the unprepared. Then hunger drove him out. The Taichut captured him, and they did not kill him, which might seem like mercy until you understand what they chose instead. They placed a kangwe around his neck. A kangi was a wooden frame, heavy, wide, fixed around the neck and wrists so that the prisoner could barely move without assistance. It was not just a restraint, it was a statement. It said, "You are not a person. You are a thing, a problem to be managed." They paraded him from gyr to gyr throughout the clan as a trophy, an object lesson in the cost of being born into the wrong bloodline at the wrong time. Here is the boy who thought he could escape us. Look at him now. But the steppe always had 2 sides to its cruelty. Among the Taichut people who kept watch over Temujin was a family, the family of a man named Sorkin Shira. And Sorkin Shira had children who took pity on the boy in the wooden frame. His daughter Kerdan would sometimes slip food to Temujin when no one was watching. His son Chilon looked at the prisoner with something that was not contempt. We do not know exactly why they helped him. Perhaps it was simple human decency, the kind that survives even in brutal systems. because something in most people recoils at the sight of a child who cannot lift his arms to protect his own face. During a festival night, when the Taichut were distracted by celebration and kumis, the fermented mare's milk that the Mongols drank at every gathering worth marking, Temujin made his move. He swung the kang like a weapon, striking his guard hard enough to knock the man down, and ran for the river. He was found hiding in the water, only his face above the surface, the wooden frame making it almost impossible to stay still. Conqueror found him first. There was a moment, a long suspended moment, in which the choice was simple: turn him in and receive the reward, or look away. Conqueror looked away. He told Temujin to stay where he was. Then he walked on. Later that night, after the search had been declared fruitless, it was Conqueror who sheltered Temujin in the wool of his carts. It was his children who burned the kangi so it could not be traced. And it was Conqueror who gave the boy a horse and pointed him toward the darkness of the open steppe. "Go," he said, "find your mother." Temujin rode through the night and found his family. And here is where we must pay very close attention, because most stories about Genghis Khan skip this moment entirely. They rush past it to get to the battles, to the armies, to the empire. But this moment, this reunion in a felt tent on a cold night, with a boy who'd been beaten and collared and displayed like an animal, this is where Genghis Khan was actually born. Not on the battlefield, not in a throne room, here. Because what Temujin did after his escape was not what most people in his position would have done. Most people, broken by captivity and terror and years of starvation and loss, either collapse inward or explode outward in random violence. Temujin did something rarer. He remembered. He remembered every act of kindness. Conqueror's family. The man who had once given his family a horse. The former ally of his father's who had once spoken well of the Borjigin clan. He catalogued these things the way another person might catalogue grievances, and he began to build. The first thing he did was claim his bride. He was perhaps 16 or 17 when he travelled to the Ungirat people and brought her home. It was not a simple thing to do. He had nothing to offer her family, no wealth, no clan, no army. He arrived as a young man of distinguished lineage and absolutely no resources. But he arrived, and Borte's family honoured the arrangement, and Borte brought something extraordinary with her, a wedding gift, a coat of black sable, a garment of real value on the steppe, where warmth and luxury were nearly the same thing. Another man might have worn that coat. Temujin gave it away. He rode to find Togrul, the Khan of the Keret, once a sworn brother of his dead father, a man of real power and real armies. Temujin placed the sable coat in Togrul's hands and spoke the oldest language of the steppe. "I am my father's son. I bring you what I have. I ask you to remember what we owe each other." Togrul looked at the boy, at the coat, at the audacity of the gesture, and he agreed to the alliance. It was a masterpiece of political intelligence, and Temujin was barely old enough to grow a full beard when he executed it. He had understood something essential, that on the steppe, loyalty was not given, it was purchased. Not with gold, there was no gold, but with the right gesture, at the right moment, accompanied by the right words. He had been watching how power worked his entire life. Now he was beginning to use what he had learned, but the steppe was not finished testing him. It delivered one more blow, one so personal, so designed to find the precise point where Temujin was most vulnerable, that it is almost impossible to read about without flinching. The Merkits came in the night. They were an old enemy, and they had an old grievance. Years earlier, Temujin's father had stolen holen from a merchant man. Blood debts on the steppe were long debts. They did not expire. They collected interest. When the merchants arrived at Temujin's camp before dawn, he ran. Others ran too. But in the chaos and the darkness and the terror of horses and screaming, someone did not escape. Borte. They took his wife. We do not know exactly how long the merchants held Borte. It was months, perhaps more. We know she was given to the brother of the original man whose wife Yasuge had taken. An exchange, a settling of accounts. The same logic that had governed his father's original transgression turned back on his son like a mirror. The steppe had no interest in mercy. What Temujin did next is the act that separates him, finally and completely, from every other young man who has ever lost something important. He did not grieve in private. He did not wait until he was strong enough to act alone. He went to Togrul. He went to his childhood companion Jamuga, the man who would eventually become his greatest rival, and he laid out, with the absolute clarity of someone who has long since stopped pretending that pride matters more than results, exactly what had happened. My wife has been taken. I need your armies. I will stand beside you in every future battle you fight if you stand beside me in this one. They said yes. The force that rode against the merchants was not Temujin's alone. It was an alliance. 3 leaders, 3 peoples, united by the logic of mutual benefit that Temujin had been piecing together since the day he had arrived at Togrul's tent with a borrowed coat. They struck the merchant camp at night. The merchants scattered, and in the chaos and the darkness, Temujin rode through the fleeing crowd calling her name. Borte, Borte. When she found him, or when he found her, the secret history records that he threw his arms around her and they held each other while the battle continued to rage around them. It is one of the only moments of unguarded human emotion in the entire epic history of his life. The great conqueror, the man who would one day reduce cities to ash and redirect rivers to punish the dead, calling his wife's name in the dark. Now we must pause again, because this story has led us somewhere important, and we should not rush past it. Look at what the steppe had given Temujin in the first 17 or 18 years of his life. A dead father, a clan that abandoned him, starvation so acute that he hunted mice, a half-brother he killed, a kangwe around his neck, months without his wife. This is not a story of privilege. This is not the story of a man who was handed power. Every lesson Temujin ever learned about leadership, about loyalty, about the mechanics of alliance and the price of betrayal, he learned it in conditions that would have broken most people entirely. And this is the part of Genghis Khan's story that almost never gets told. Not because it is unknown, but because it is uncomfortable. Because it asks us a question that has no easy answer. What does extraordinary suffering do to a person? Sometimes it destroys them. Sometimes it diminishes them. Sometimes it produces cruelty dressed up as strength, and the world pays the price for that confusion for generations. But sometimes, not always, and we should not romanticize this, but sometimes, suffering strips away everything that is not essential, every illusion, every assumption, every comfortable story a person tells themselves about how the world works, and what is left, after all of that is stripped away, is something very clear. Temujin knew things that men raised in comfort and certainty rarely know. He knew that loyalty is not automatic. It must be earned and maintained. He knew that betrayal comes from the people closest to you, not from strangers. He knew that the only people worth trusting are those who have demonstrated, under pressure, that they can be trusted. He knew that gratitude, properly expressed and properly remembered, is a form of political capital. He knew that alliances built on genuine mutual benefit outlast alliances built on fear or obligation. He knew all of this because he had lived all of it, not in a classroom, not in a council chamber, on the frozen ground of the steppe with an empty stomach and a wooden frame around his neck. There is one final detail about his childhood that I want to leave you with tonight. When Sorkin Shira helped Temujin escape from the Taichut, he asked for nothing. He expected nothing. He was a man of modest means helping a boy he barely knew, at considerable personal risk, because something in him refused to look away. Years later, after Temujin had defeated the Taichut clan and was building the confederation of tribes that would eventually become the Mongol Empire, a man appeared before him. It was Sorkin Shira. Temujin recognized him immediately. The world's future conqueror dismounted. He stood in front of the man who had once hidden him in a cart of wool and burned his kang and given him a horse and sent him back to his mother. And Temujin said simply that he had not forgotten. Sorkin Shira and his family were given land, wealth, and positions of honor in the new order that was coming. His children who had slipped food through the bars of the Kange were rewarded. His son Chileon became one of Temujin's most trusted generals. This is the pattern that would define Temujin's entire career. He never forgot a kindness. He never forgot a betrayal. These were not simply personal feelings. They were the twin engines of an entire system of governance that he was building from the ground up. A system where loyalty was genuinely rewarded and disloyalty was genuinely and absolutely punished. Where you came from did not matter. What you did mattered. A blacksmith who showed courage in battle could become a commander. A commander who showed cowardice could become a slave. The world he was building had no room for the accident of birth, because the accident of his own birth had given him nothing at all, and he had made himself anyway. We will leave Temujin here tonight. Not yet the great Khan, not yet the man whose name would make cities tremble, and whose armies would reshape the map of the known world. Still young, still building, still learning the shape of the empire he has not yet dreamed, but already unmistakably himself. There is a version of this story that is easy to tell, the one where a great man rises from nothing and conquers everything, and the suffering was simply the necessary price of greatness. That story is too simple, and it does a disservice to what actually happened. The real story is harder. The real story contains a boy who killed his half-brother over food, a teenager who escaped captivity by chance and the mercy of strangers, a young husband who called his wife's name in the dark while a battle raged around him, a man who kept a perfect ledger of every kindness done to him and paid every debt with the kind of precision that can only come from knowing exactly what it felt like to be abandoned by people who owed you everything. He was not born great. He was made by a world that tried very hard to unmake him. And the most extraordinary thing about Temujin, the boy before he was the conqueror, is not that he survived. It is that he paid attention the entire time. He paid attention when his father died and the clan left, so that he would never confuse loyalty assumed with loyalty earned. He paid attention when Bekta took the food, so that he would understand the difference between power that protects and power that simply consumes. He paid attention when Sorkin Shira looked away and burned the Kange, so that he would recognize the moral weight of small acts of courage in a world where such acts cost the people who perform them a great deal. He was building a philosophy, not in a library, not at the foot of a teacher, on the frozen ground of the steppe, with everything at stake and nothing to spare. Sleep well tonight. The steppe will still be there tomorrow, vast and cold and full of grass moving in the wind. And somewhere in the dark of that imagined landscape, a boy with a blood clot in his fist is already learning everything he will ever need to know.